Good evening. Welcome to our Judges Bible study. We are going to finish tonight, chapter 16. It won't take us very long. If you're looking for a shorter video or a shorter class, this is probably the one. Because what's left of Samson, we couldn't cover it all last week, but there's not a lot left to his story. And what we're going to do then when we get done with that is talk a little bit about the book of Judges so far. It's a great place to do that, because Samson is the last of the judges mentioned in the book, or at least the account mentioned. So it'll be a great time for us to take a pause, and we'll pick up in 6 weeks after the holidays, and give us a chance to talk about what we've learned so far. So maybe let that percolate in your head. If you've got some stuff, it's like, I really enjoyed this, or I have trouble with this, or I have a question about this, or a comment, we'll do that not too far from now. So let's open with prayer. Heavenly Father, as we rejoice to receive your gifts of word and sacrament on Sunday mornings, we also rejoice that we have your word. We need it. Life has been really, really difficult in certain ways. That constant kind of overhead pressure of what's going to happen with coronavirus, it's just always there. And it's frustrating. And so we pray tonight that your word would lift our spirits as we think about how you come to be our leader and our rescuer. And that as we study your word, you would lead us to trust in you in the midst of whatever circumstances we may find ourselves. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, any opportunities to pray with anybody this week, have a conversation with anybody? I'd love to be able to hear that.
Well, last week, I didn't get a chance to share, but
Okay.
one of my neighbor's husbands was taken to the emergency. And so she came by to tell me, I saw it and everything, but she came by the next day to tell me what was going on. And so I said, let's pray. And so I did. And
Awesome. Good for you, Ruth. So I'm curious, how many husbands does she have? Because you said one of my neighbor's husbands. I go, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's sort of kind of reverse Utah sort of
he's
thing.
come back now and he's under hospice.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
So I've been praying for him.
Good for you, you know.
But we didn't have a chance this Monday, Marilyn and I. We couldn't get into the lighthouse.
Yeah. Yeah, things are going to be shutting down now. So
they had one lady, and we ring the doorbell, and she comes out and shuts the door behind her, and so we knew already what was going on.
Yep.
She said, "I don't want you inside. I don't want you inside."
Yep.
You know. But she didn't have her telephone number, so she would have called her and let her know before we got up there. You know. But, they need our prayers because they are really very afraid that it might take over.
Yep.
You know,
So yeah, praying for people who work in care facilities right now is a really good ministry, and maybe even to send a card, or if you want to be extra safe, an electronic communication, and say, you know, our family is praying for all the employees for you guys at Ponte Palmero or at Gold Country or whatever facility it may be. I visited Dell and Lynn today, and I was able to get in. I called this morning and said, hey, can I still come in? And they let me. I had an appointment, but that's going to become less and less frequent. But we forget about those folks. We think, oh, doctors and nurses, they're on the front lines. Well, so are people who are in facilities with people who have fragile health. And they have to go out and come in every day. So it's important to remember them in prayers as well. My wife and I decided before everything closed down, we'd eat at some restaurant. So we did that on Monday evening. And we asked our server if there was something we could pray about for him. And he did offer us something to pray about. And so we were able to do that. And so that was a good opportunity for us. So as things close down, all the more reason for us to be ready to pray. All the more reason for us to be ready to share the hope of Christ with others who are going to feel isolated and alone. Okay, so last week we started Samson's downfall, chapter 16. I should have labeled it part 1 and part 2 maybe. I think I did on a study guide last week. So today we're going to see the end of Samson's life. and kind of talk about that. And then, like I said, we'll talk about the book. So just by way of introduction, some of the stuff I shared with you last week, of course, still applies. Chapter 16 relates to the downfall and death of Samson. So last week, what happened to Samson? Who were the people involved and what happened? Delilah, right.
She finally got the secret to his strength.
Right. And what was the secret to his strength?
His hair.
No, God.
What was the secret to his
God.
strength? Yeah. Growing long hair does not make you stronger.
Yeah.
It might make you smell stronger if you're a man, but it will not make you physically stronger. The idea was he had been set apart, dedicated to Yahweh from before his birth, and his hair was a sign of that. By cutting off his hair, he's saying, I don't need Yahweh. I'm not dedicated to him anymore. That was his downfall. And Delilah, well, what's interesting, do you remember what was interesting about Samson there in that? How was his relationship with Delilah described? It had never been described before about any of his relationships.
He really loved her.
He loved him.
Thanks, Wayne. Yeah. It actually says he loved her, and that had never been said before by Samson or anything. So, yep, and then he was captured, his eyes were gouged out, and he was taken to Gaza, and we're going to pick up on that city again today. Again, it's likely that the events of chapter 16 take place toward the end of Samson's years of leading Israel. I mentioned that last week. And then a reminder, Samson is the last judge mentioned in the book. And here we are in chapter 16. We got 5 chapters to go. All right, so just a few verses tonight. We'll start with verses 23 to 26. And I'm wondering if someone would care to read that. Sue, thank you.
Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, Our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain. While they were in high spirits, they shouted, Bring out Samson to entertain us. So they called Samson out of the prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them.
All right, thank you. So a lot of interesting stuff goes on in this chapter, and I just want to kind of remind you that now this is a generalization, so you have to be careful with that, but the New Testament's written in Greek, and Greek is a very precise language, and a lot of the authors of the New Testament will use details of tenses and voices with the verbs and so on to give you very particular details. And preachers love to focus on that. And well, this verb with this ending in this situation in the context, means this, and it's used 17 times in the book of Romans, and that can be very helpful. Hebrew does that sometimes, but more often you have to learn from what is said about what happened or who did what with Hebrew. That's also true of Greek, by the way, right? And when you read the narratives, like the Gospels and Acts, in Acts we saw that, actions speak very loudly there. And so you get a lot of that in the book of Hebrews. And so we see that all the way through tonight. And I think that'll come into play. You'll see that. Okay. So there are 3 main thoughts in verses 23 and 24. Here they are. Number 1, this is a huge celebration for the Philistines. Thousands of people are there. It's called a great or a large or a big celebration, and it certainly is for them. Thought number 2, Samson is recognized, and he's described in the text, right, as a great enemy. This is our enemy. And so, again, think about how many thousand Philistines did Samson kill, and how many times did maybe he show up and, maybe hundreds of Philistines ran off. They'd never do that for anybody else, but when he showed up, they all ran. He had supernatural strength from the Lord. And the third main point that you see here is credit for the victory over Samson is given to Dagon, their god. And so how do you see that in the text? Look at the verses there. And where do you see repetition or something like that? Take a look at that. What are some phrases that are repeated?
Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands.
Yeah, that's said twice, isn't it? So what are they saying? Our God has delivered Samson into our hands, you know. And they're saying this. And if it's a big celebration, almost a religious party, if you will, one of the commentaries I was looking at said this kind of looks like it was a song. And so they may have composed a song for this event. And that might seem weird to us. But if you think about it, it's not that weird. You guys probably know how the Star Spangled Banner was composed, right? Francis Scott Key is a prisoner on board a British ship, and he gets up early to see if the flag is still waving, and he writes a song about it. You might think of the Israelites when they crossed the Red Sea, and the Egyptians were laying their dead on the shore. Miriam composed a song, and Moses. So you see that happening, and in fact, in the book of Judges, Deborah and Barak sing after his victory. Now, we're not told what Samson was made to do. They said, entertain us. This Hebrew verb is used usually to mean like he laughed. So Abraham and Sarah laughed at God when he said, hey, you're going to have a kid. Remember, they laughed, and then they named him Isaac. Well, Isaac, that's the Hebrew verb. We say it a little bit differently, of course, but that's where that word comes from. And so we don't know exactly what it means, but the implication, right, is that when he was brought out, they laughed at him. Somehow they ridiculed him. But there are a couple of things I think that would lend to that. One, that he's led by a boy. And I was looking at the translations, and not all of them say that. But that's probably, it's not really a servant so much as it could be, but it generally means a young boy, like early teens, junior high, something like that. So here's this mighty warrior who once killed 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. He's got a little boy leading him. That would be humiliating. And then the other one, I didn't even write it down here, right? The other one is I think that he's taken to the pillars, and he says to the boy, it says that he was leaning against them. So here's this great big strong man who's like, find me a pillar. I'm tired. I got to lean against something. We don't know how he was treated all this time. Now remember, his strength was not in his hair. His strength was not that he gradually was healing and he was getting better and getting stronger. And when no one's watching, he's doing push-ups. If you watch and I may be way out of left field here for you, but if you watch the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, one of the Batman movies, the hero, Batman, is in this prison. It's a pit, and there's no way out. I mean, there's a rock wall that goes up, way up there, and you're let down on like a 100-foot rope. There's no way you're getting out. And his back is injured. Well, eventually someone fixes his back, and he starts doing push-ups. And that's the way we look at things. So I'm going to work my way up. I'm going to get stronger. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to win. We don't have that with Samson. He's blinded. He's in bronze shackles, and he's grinding grain like an animal. There's no indication that he's getting stronger physically. The only thing we got from last week was that his hair was starting to grow. And that was a sign of the Nazarite, a sign of being dedicated to Yahweh. Now, we don't know if Samson was planning destruction before he came to the pillars or not. He may have said to the boy, lead me to the pillars, because he knew he was going to go there, and he knew he was going to pray, or he might have got to the pillars that held the place up, and all of a sudden it flashed in his mind, this is what I want to do. We just don't know. Okay, verses 27 to 30. Someone feel like reading? Paula, you got that?
Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood. Bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand the other, Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived.
All right, thank you. So here we have the death of Samson and the Philistines who are present there. The lords of the Philistines were present here. Now, this is a great verse because one of the main rules that we need to remember whenever we're interpreting the Bible and a particular word or a phrase is that context is the most important part of determining meaning. Now, why is that important? Because pastors like me who get training in language and look at some Greek and Hebrew, our skull size can swell, right? And we start thinking, well, I did a word study on this. Well, that can be a very helpful tool. But just because a word means something in this book in chapter 3, and you go to a totally different book in chapter 19, doesn't mean it means the same. The context makes all the difference in the world. For example, here it says, literally, it says Samson laughed. But what of course it means is he entertained them. He caused them to laugh. And so you have to look at the context. And so the lords of the Philistines here in chapter 16 is all kinds of people. It's a word that includes any kind of leaders. But when we go back to chapter 16, verses 5, 8, and 18, in all likelihood, you're not going to have hundreds of leaders descending on Delilah, right? How do you hide them? How do you have them in the city and not have Samson know? And so there, it probably were the 5 lords of the 5 main Philistine cities. So you have to look at context. That's always very, very important. This was a large celebration in a large building. A whole bunch of commentators, well, I don't know if I can say it that way, but there are commentators who say, wait a minute, this is impossible. The building would be too large. How would you have 3,000 people on some kind of balcony? Well, that's kind of the mistake of looking at ancient peoples and saying they weren't as evolved as we were. But when you look back, how do you build those pyramids again? I've got in my new member class materials, Fit for Life, there's a picture of a pyramid in Egypt, and the base of it is about 13 acres, and the variance and how level it is like 7/8 of an inch across 13 acres. It's almost perfectly level. How do you do that? Without a laser that can go 13 acres. I mean, how do you do that accurately? But they did it. So they were very, very intelligent in construction and building things and so on. So, modern people today, we consider ourselves more evolved and smarter, et cetera, et cetera. And we say, well, how could they possibly do it? They could never build a building that big. It's unrealistic. So what's interesting, though, is what does it say at the end about how many people Samson killed?
More than when he was alive.
More than when he was alive. That's right. So, you can say, well, 3,000 is an exaggeration, but then the author at the end kind of doubles down, and he says he killed more as he died than he did when he lived. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? Now, this is the second time that Samson has cried out to Yahweh. Let's turn back to chapter 15, verse 18. Turn back in your Bible to chapter 15, verse 18. And maybe someone could read that. This is after one of Samson's victories.
Because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, "You have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?"
Yeah. So it's the exact same verbiage, exact same language in both places. The same verbs are used. Samson cried out to Yahweh. I think one time it says Samson cried out, and then the other one says just he cried out. But other than that, the verbs are identical. So this is the second time he's done that. He's praying. Now Samson asks Yahweh to remember me, right? Isn't that what it says in your Bible? As he prays? Yeah, remember me. And that word is frequently used in the context of relationships. And I thought I had some verses there. I guess I didn't write them down. But typically, it's like when Yahweh remembers his covenant. Well, what does that mean? It means that he's thinking about the people he has this relationship with, and he's going to honor that. You see, so for many of us Westerners in Europe and North America and South America, To us, remembering is simply a mental exercise. Hey, do you remember that trip we took last year? Yep, I remember. And we're done. Frequently, in the Hebrew way of thinking in the Old Testament, remembering is to remember this connection, this relationship we have. So Moses prays, Lord, remember your covenant with your people and do not destroy them. Remembering often includes doing something. And so in the Passover meal, you're remembering the Exodus. And so it has a kind of a very full meaning, which I really like, by the way. And remember that Jesus in the Lord's Supper says, do this in what?
Remember.
So the doing and the remembering are all together, along with the eating and drinking. And the same is true of the Passover. And so by eating and drinking the Passover meal, you were remembering the Exodus. You were almost participating in it. And so Samson here says, remember me. We had this relationship, and I'm adding extra words, of course, but I turned away from you, but I'm asking you to still remember the covenant that you made with me, even though I turned my back on that covenant to be a Nazarite. So it's basically saying, I don't deserve this, but, based on the relationship is what I'm asking for. And that's kind of similar, isn't it? I think one of the things we can take from this passage or section tonight, and I should have put in the summary, and I'm just thinking of it now, so it's not there. But one of the things we can take from this is to think about what prayer is. Prayer is talking to God based on our relationship with Him. Not because we've towed the line and behaved at a kind of a certain level for the week. If you're a long-time Christian, you sort of get used to living a certain way and trying to keep the commandments. That's all good. But then it's very easy for us to become sort of thinking like, well, that's because I'm living on this kind of maintaining this level of behavior, God is pleased with me and I can pray to Him whenever I want. God is ready to listen to your prayers, whether you're behaving well or behaving the worst you've ever behaved. Why is that true?
Because of the relationship God has with us.
And what kind of relationship does He have with us? What's it based on?
Well, based on love.
Those are both true, but
Mercy and forgiveness,
why?
because Jesus died.
Right. So our relationship with God is based on what Christ did for us, His good deeds, His good works. And so when we pray, we're praying because of what Jesus, on account of what Jesus did for us. Samson has no business praying, from a purely legalistic perspective, right? He said, I'd rather be with Delilah than you. If I cut my hair, it's worth it to me. There's someone I can trust. There's someone that I really love. And God's going, well, what am I? And so Samson broke the covenant. And so Samson has nothing to stand on before God say, well, he can't promise to do better. He's blinded. He's done. He can't, all he can really say is, I don't deserve it, but I'm going to ask. And that's exactly what we do. But because of Christ, the Father welcomes our prayers. So I think that's a good application from this. Now, having said all that, what does Samson pray for? Vengeance. Kill them all. I want to kill them all, Yahweh. How's that sound? And what's interesting, the translators wrestle with this verse. Let's see, which verse is that?
28 is the prayer.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, so 28, thank you. So he's praying, and the translators kind of wrestle with this. Literally, it says, let me surely have vengeance for one of my two eyes. That's what it says. But every translator says, well, that doesn't make sense to me, so I'm going to say this one time. But that's not really what it says. And so Samson seems to be saying, well, I want to defeat. They took out both my eyes, even if I can get revenge for one of them, that's fine for me. And that's kind of like Samson, isn't it? He's impulsive. He's reckless. He's not carefully wording a prayer like a seminary graduate. He's hurting and he's angry. So Samson's life was tangled with the Philistines, and so is his death. We see this from the get-go. Remember way back in, chapter 13? The angel of the Lord, and we discovered that's Yahweh, of course. and he says, Samson will begin the salvation of Israel from the Philistines. And so from before he was born, God said, he's going to mess with the Philistines. He's going to start beginning the deliverance. Now, what's significant about this theologically, not only were the Philistine rulers killed, which would cause, I'm sure, a lot of political problems, and you have to have successors and leadership, there'd be leadership backing for a while. But the temple of Dagon was also destroyed. And by the way, Dagon, we don't really know for sure what that refers to. People use the Hebrew word for fish is dog, and it's the same letters. And in fact, you see that in the book of Jonah. It can mean fish or whale. It's a sea creature. It doesn't have to be big, but it's a sea creature. And so people used to think, well, this is the fish god. But then there's another word that sounds like the Hebrew word for grain, which is Dagon. And so it might be the grain god. And we don't really know for sure, but that's where most people are leaning now. But it's significant that the temple is destroyed. See, God's making a theological statement. You go back to the beginning of this section, as the Philistines celebrated, what were they celebrating again?
The capture of Samson.
Okay. And to what did they attribute it to?
Their God.
Their god Dagon. What happens here at the end?
They destroy the
The
temple.
whole temple is destroyed. Now let's take a look at 1 Samuel 5, 1-5. This is later on. Samuel is now leading Israel. He's a priest and a prophet. And they don't have any more judges. They have Samuel. And pretty soon after that, they'll have King Solomon and King David. And that'll be kind of the putting down of the Philistines. But the people were so wicked that God allowed the Ark of the Covenant to be captured by the Philistines. And it was taken to the temple of Dagon. And let's read about what happened. So would somebody read verses 1-5 of 1 Samuel 5?
After the Philistines had captured the ark of God, they took it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then they carried the ark into Dagon's temple and set it beside Dagon. When the people of Ashdod rose early in the next day, there was Dagon fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. They took Dagon and put him back in his place. But the following morning, when they rose, there was Dagon fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. His head and his hands had been broken off and were laying on the threshold. Only his body remained. That is why to this day neither the priests of Dagon nor any other who entered Dagon's temple at Ashdod stepped on the threshold.
Yeah, I have no idea what that last verse means. I didn't bother studying that. But isn't it interesting that the Ark of the Covenant is captured? And in ancient cultures, if you want a military victory, you would often attribute that to your deity and say, my deity is stronger than your deity. And so here, back in Judges 16, the Philistines would say, Dagon is stronger than Yahweh because we captured Samson. But what happens? The temple is destroyed. Here in 1 Samuel 5, the Ark of the Covenant is captured. That was Yahweh's place of being present with his people. But for 2 days in a row, the statue of Dagon falls down. He bows down before Yahweh. And the second day, his head and hands are broken off. Now he can't see. He's dead, and he can't do anything. His hands are broken off. So that's pretty significant theologically. Okay, the epilogue, verse 31, chapter 16. Someone read, please. Wayne?
Then his brothers and all his family came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had judged Israel 20 years.
All right, thank you. So this is kind of interesting because for the first time, his brothers are mentioned. Where have they been? We don't know. We just don't know. What we do know is that this was such a well-known event, huge deal, that they were able to go into a Philistine city and get his body. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? And so this was a very, very big deal. It also it says all his father's house went down there. So this was probably a large armed party just going to get his body. But it reminds us that Samson was leading Israel. How, we're not given details how, what exactly he did, were there military battles he led? We don't know. Did he make pronouncements? We don't know. But clearly his death was a large event in the life of Israel. The narrator notes again that Samson led Israel for 20 years. We read that earlier, right? The end of chapter, was at the end of chapter 15, right?
Yeah.
And so that's bookends, and that's why the commentator, and I think he's right, says that this chapter, chapter 16, is toward the end of his career and then the end of his life. And now, finally, let's look up Hebrews 11, 32 to 34. Hebrews 11, 32 to 34. Hebrews 11 is often known as the faith chapter, and it talks about what faith is and then gives examples of people from the Old Testament living by faith. And we're going to read about some of those people, including Samson, verses 32 to 34, if someone would please do that.
And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered the kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies.
Okay, so it goes on from there. And so when you know Samson a little bit better, like we do now, because we spent 3 chapters in the book of Judges on him, would you hold him up as an example of faith to your children when you were raising them?
No.
You probably wouldn't. And yet here in Hebrews 11, he's held up as an example of faith. So what in the verses that we just read would help you to realize, yeah, that is an example?
Well, he knew where his strength came from, and so when he prayed for the strength to come back for the revenge, he called upon the Lord.
Or when he prayed for water too. So
Yeah.
when we looked at 15, we said that's probably his high point, when he acknowledges that Yahweh is his helper and he cries out to him. Samson had some real low points. He didn't have a consistent bunch of high points, but he did have some. And so as the author of the letter to Hebrews looks at that, he's not saying Samson was a great guy, but he's saying where in his life do we see examples of faith? And you can also look at the description here, whose weakness was turned to strength and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. That's probably a reference to Samson. And so what the author of Hebrews is saying, because Samson in battle trusted Yahweh, that's a great example of faith. Now, there's other examples, and David is one of them, right? When he fought Goliath, he said, and much better, than Samson, he said, "You come at me with sword and spear, I come at you in the name of the Lord." He said, it's on Yahweh, and I'm going to fight you on that basis. Samson wasn't so articulate in describing his faith, but that's probably what the author of the letter to the Hebrews is dealing with there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. So we don't hold Samson up as this great example of how to live as a believer, because he wasn't. But we can say when he faced insurmountable odds. I mean, how would you like to have 1,000 guys running at you trying to kill you? I wouldn't like it. And if I saw like a tire iron on the ground, that can be an effective weapon. But against 1,000, no way. I'd be dead. But God gave Samson strength to accomplish that. And that was by faith. Samson knew he would die unless Yahweh bailed him out. And Yahweh did bail him out. And so he cried out to him in prayer saying, "I need water." He's recognizing that Yahweh is his Lord. Right? Any questions about Samson before we move to our summary stuff today? Right, so you're all experts on Samson. Hey, wait, does that make you Samsonites? Oh, I'm sorry. That probably is going to give you a lot of baggage going home, isn't it? I shouldn't do that, really. Yeah, well, I'm just trying to convey some humor into this. All right, so we're going to review a little bit of the book of Judges, Now, we're going to be done here in 10 minutes, I think, unless you guys have lots of good questions, which I hope you do. So in chapter 2, and that's what the numbers refer to here, Judges 2, verses 13 to 14, 15, 16, 17 to 19. If you remember way back when we started this, if you were here, we talked about the fact that there's this cycle that the people of Israel go through. And Judges 2 lays it out beautifully. It summarizes it before we see it played out. And so the book of Judges says what? After a period of peace, the people provoke God. What happens then? God raises an oppressor. He allows some foreign army or some local king to oppress the people of Israel. Why? Because it will drive them to repentance. So what happens next is the people cry to God for help. Then God raises a judge to deliver, followed by a period of peace. Now, again, remember, the word judge does not mean a magistrate who sits on a bench with a gavel rendering legal decisions. There were probably a few times when that happened with some of these leaders, but far and away, a definition for the people who are described as judges means someone who is leading, and especially, and I like this word here, deliver, or another good word is rescue. So God raised up a rescuer, a deliverer, dare we say the word, a savior? Because that's exactly what they were. And in fact, you may recall from our introduction that the only person, well, there's only one person in the entire book of Judges who's actually given the title judge. Do you remember who that was?
Yahweh.
Yeah, it's Yahweh. He's the only one in the book of Judges literally called a judge. The other ones are described with the verb. We just read one tonight. And Samson judged Israel for 20 years. Okay? So that's the cycle. Wayne.
So we talked about, you said that they are deliverers, it's the salvation.
Yes.
So the people throughout history from this point forward, the Jewish history, the Israelites, would still be looking for that at the time of Jesus. And they would be looking for a deliverer that's a conqueror.
Some did. And so, you know, it's hard to paint. Well, we have to paint with a broad brush. And so we just have to remember, I mean, what do people think of Jesus today in the Christian church? Or what are people looking for from Jesus? There's a lot, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's, I hope Jesus comes today. Or maybe someone who's feeling guilty. I need someone who's compassionate. Someone who's feeling oppressed. You know, maybe someone being persecuted. I need someone who's going to rescue me and defeat my enemies. You know, it's all kinds of things. So when Jesus shows up, you listen to some of the New Testament and then extra biblical writings, and they were looking for different kinds of things. Some did want a rescuer. Some wanted someone like David, who would be this great military leader, or someone like Samson, who would rescue Israel from the Romans. So there were some, yes, but not everybody was looking for that. But you raise a great point, because again, why is this book in the Bible? It's there to show the utter futility of turning away from God and trying to lead yourself, which is what we do in the United States every day of our lives. It doesn't work. And so the book is so powerful that way. And when we get to the sort of the lengthy epilogue, or whatever I'll call it, the end of the book, chapters 17 through 21, we're going to see how bad Israel's, how far they sunk. And the last phrase of the book is, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. I mean, that's a damning statement for the people of Israel and for us. And what do we loudly proclaim as one of our very highest values in the United States today?
I can do it myself.
No one can tell me how to live.
Yeah.
That's just another way of saying what's at the end of the book of Judges. It doesn't work. So anyways, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but this cycle is really important to remember, because it gets worse as they go. So, for example, when we get here to Samson, the people never cry out to God. It's not recorded, at least. That's pretty pathetic. You don't even look to God for help anymore. Okay, and then I put this in here simply to give you something to look at, and notice that there are 12 judges. And when we were, again in our introduction, we noted that there's a judge from every tribe. Levi's not listed, but there's a judge from every tribe. And so some of them, of course, are prominent, get lots of chapters. So Gideon, he had lots of chapters in the book, right? We just read Samson. He got what? 13, 14, 15, 16, 4 chapters. Jephthah had a pretty lengthy thing. But then there's other guys, like remember we had those so-called minor judges after and before Jephthah? Tola and Jair and these 3 guys. I mean, they don't really do anything that's recorded other than to say how many sons they had. I mean, there's some significant things said about them, but it's just a few verses. So why are they in there? Well, one of the reasons is to show that all Israel was corrupted and God raised up saviors, deliverers, rescuers for all Israel. And I think that's probably the main reason. Now, the tribes are mentioned here, and these are the years of, how many years were they oppressed? 8. And what was the duration of their peace? 40. So that's what the 2 numbers here mean. They're a little confusing. I looked at it when I was putting this together, and I go, why are there 2 numbers here? Samson didn't lead for 40, and then I remembered, oh yeah, you get back up to the introduction before Jephthah, and there's 40 years of oppression between the Ammonites and the Philistines, and he leads for 20. Okay? Any questions about that? Now, this is, to me, probably the most significant slide that we'll look at here at the end, because it shows the downward spiral of Israel. And I'm not sure I even used this slide in the introduction because it was too detailed. But now that you've heard about all the judges, and you'll recognize a few names here and there and so on, you can see how we start here and things just get worse and worse and worse. And we haven't got to this part yet. We'll do that in January. Okay? So, and I guess maybe for the sake of video, I'll draw on this instead of stand by the TV because the poor folks on video won't be able to see what's going on. Okay, so let's see here. Let's do this. Okay, so at the very beginning, we've got Joshua, right? So I'm circling Joshua. And remember, Joshua is the leader after Moses, and he's a great guy. I mean, that's one way we could say he's faithful. He walked with Moses, led with Moses, and he does things the right way, by and large. Joshua and Caleb were the only 2 spies that entered the promised land, saying, yeah, we can do this because Yahweh's with us. The 10 other spies said, no, we can't do it. The Canaanites are too much for us. And so that's where we start. And so that's the high point, and that's why on the slide, of course, or in the picture, you see Joshua listed highest. Now, Othniel is right after him, and he's from the tribe of Judah. And we don't get lots of verses about him, but remember, he was the best judge in terms of ticking off all the check boxes. He marries Caleb's daughter. Remember, Joshua and Caleb were the only 2 good spies, so to speak? So he marries a good Israelite girl, a good believing girl. And when Israel needs help, he rescues them. He's the deliverer, and he does everything the way he should. And then notice here, it kind of gets worse and worse. Ehud comes and delivers from Moab, and then Barak is afraid to lead. What kind of a judge is that? He has to kind of get prodded by Deborah. Go on, you can do it. And then Gideon, notice the line up here. Skeptic, Gideon constantly needs reassurance. Now, let not the Lord be angry, but tomorrow let the fleece be wet and the ground be dry. Okay, let me just not bother, Lord, but the next day, how about the fleece be wet and the ground be dry? And then I'll know you're with me. Oh yeah, and despite the fact you sent an angel, and really it was the angel of the Lord, Yahweh, to talk to me before. And remember, he gets rid of the altar to Baal and the Asherah pole in his hometown. But what time of day does he do it? He sneaks, right? And everybody gets up in the morning and say, hey, who did this? He was afraid. And if you remember, by the end of Gideon's life, back in his hometown, there's a shrine built up already, And he has some kind of ephod thing that people are starting to worship. So it's getting worse, isn't it? And then Gideon's son Abimelech, and he's down here, right here. Remember Abimelech, that's where we see for the first time Israelite on Israelite violence. He kills, 70 brothers, and Abimelech is the son of a mistress. Right? And so 70 of them are killed on a stone. And then he tries to become king. The Israelites try to make him king. What is going on? So it just gets worse and worse. And then you have Jephthah, and he is leading against the Ammonites. There's civil war. Now you've got full-on civil war. And remember that Jephthah came home. Whatever comes out of my door at home, I'm going to sacrifice. It's his daughter. Good gravy. You know, what's going on? And then we get to Samson after this period of civil war, and he's just like, you know, he's led by his hormones basically, and he's a wild man. And he's not very faithful, and he does things that would make him unclean, which he was not supposed to do. He lies to his parents about it. You know, he's just not doing anything the way it should be. And so that's where we stop. Oh yeah, and it says no spiritual leader intermarried with Philistines. You never hear of Samson encouraging the Israelites to be faithful to Yahweh, or other than the 2 little short prayers we have, which were all about his own either self-preservation or vengeance. You don't hear any of that. Any of it. And there's other details we could add. For example, right before Jephthah, you can remember that the people finally cried out. I think it was after 18 years. And Yahweh says, no, I'm done. And remember, there were 7 gods listed. You followed after these. And didn't I rescue you 7 times? So God's saying, I've been completely faithful. I've remembered, right? I've remembered our relationship. You have not. And so this is crazy. And I'm done. I'm exasperated with you. But at the same time, I'm exasperated with your misery. Okay, I'm gonna raise up Samson. But at the end of Samson's life, the land had peace. The people returned to Yahweh. There's nothing like that. Nothing. And so now, when we get back in January, this is right here is where we'll pick up.
Micah.
And Micah is not the prophet, not Micah the prophet. It's a different guy. He's a Levite, but it's just going to get worse. It's going to keep going downhill. Okay?
Pastor?
Yeah.
What I find kind of interesting in the book of Judges so far is that we know there's got to be a faithful remnant, albeit quite small, but it's not really talked about.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And God always saves a remnant. That's a great word. It's a great theological word. You read the prophets, and they talk about how God will have a remnant left. When Elijah gets really frustrated, he says there's 7,000 in Israel who have not bent the knee to Baal or kissed him. In other words, they haven't gone into Baal worship. So that's encouraging. But wait a minute. Only 7,000. You know, the population of Israel was in the hundreds of thousands, and probably quite a bit more than that. That's a very small remnant. And so while we need to hang on to that and rejoice that God preserves a remnant and thank him that he has called us to faith so we can be part of that, that doesn't mean it's going to be big. Martin Luther talked about the gospel, and he talked about Germany, and he said, you know, he said the coming of the gospel is like a fruitful rain cloud that comes over and waters and makes growth happen. But he said it's not going to be here forever. God's going to move on to other places so they can hear the gospel too. And we need to take advantage of it while we can. And what's Christianity in Germany like today, in Europe?
Nothing.
There are Christians. It's not nothing. There's a remnant.
No, but not many.
But
Very small.
those beautiful cathedrals
They're close.
are 90% empty every Sunday. Years ago, I mean, it's like 8 or 9 years ago, I read about England, that there are more mosques than churches in England today. That's the land where the King James Bible came from. So the gospel came and people turned their backs, and God said, okay. Now, praise the Lord, he's working in China like mad and other parts of the world. People are becoming Christians in Africa so rapidly. It's wonderful. But we need to very much be humble and repent make it our goal that maybe this week or this month or this year or in my life, there'll be someone that I can share the hope of Christ with. And let my fear or anxiety, just throw it in the trash. We don't have time for that. So I think the book of Judges really illustrates that well. Now there's hope, because we'll get into 1 Samuel, and eventually God's going to raise up David. And then you see great faithfulness in him and in Israel for a time. And so there's always hope that God will raise leaders up and make things happen. But we have to approach that with all humility. Okay? Any other thoughts or questions? I think this is my last slide. I can't remember, and I can't see ahead when I'm recording. Okay? Yep, this is my last slide, so let's close in prayer, and then we can talk a little bit. Heavenly Father, we thank and praise you for showing us in Judges how completely we fail. Not just that, though. You show us that so that we will completely rely on your grace. We are failures without you, but with you, with the forgiveness and mercy earned for us by Jesus, with his perfection credited to us, with the Holy Spirit working in our lives, we are different people, and we can do the things you call on us to do. So help us to do just that. Where we are leaders for children or grandchildren or spouses or friends, help us to lead well and point to our leader, Jesus Christ. We thank you for the rain that we've had the last 24 hours. We pray for our nation and our state and our world. Pray that a vaccine that is ethical would soon be able to go around the world, and that relief would be in sight soon for the coronavirus. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.